1000 Hours Outside podcast. My name is Ginny Urich. I'm the founder of 1000 Hours Outside and can hardly believe I get to talk with Carla Hannaford, Dr. Carla Hannaford. Again, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so
Thank you.
glad you're here. You know, I talk about you all the time, and I think that other people do too, because your books are so life-changing and so applicable in so many different areas. And so, about a year ago, or a little over a year ago, we had a chat about your book, Smart Moves: Why Learning is Not All in Your Head. And that book changed my life. Really changed my life. It's a top book. I always tell parents it's a top one to read because people need to understand that learning doesn't just happen when you sit, and that movement is also learning. So, just a fantastic book, and we had an amazing conversation about that. And then afterward, I read another of your books because you have four of them: The Dominance Factor: How Knowing Your Dominant Eye, Ear, Brain, Hand, and Foot Can Improve Your Learning. And wow, Carla, another one. Things I had no idea about. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your amazing books.
Mm.
This is exciting. Carla Hannaford is a sought after and inspiring and knowledgeable lecturer, consultant, workshop leader to 51 countries worldwide, award winning author, biologist, and educator, quoted in more than 1,000 journals and books, and author of 4 books, all of which are translated into many languages. So I came across the dominance factor after our conversation about smart moves. And it was so eye opening, Carla. It helped me understand myself in a whole bunch of new ways, like why I can't read when I'm stressed out. And it helped me understand our kids in a whole bunch of new ways. And it opened up my eyes to all the ways that this is integrated into our lives for teachers, for coaches, for business owners, for managers, for this world that we're living in that has become primarily a sedentary world where a lot of our jobs are not moving and we're sitting. So the dominance factor has so many implications. So can we start with, I mean, I don't think that most people know about this at all, the dominance profiles. So I think that a majority of people probably know, most people know they're right or left-handed. And then a lot of people know
Mm.
about right and left brain, but it goes
Mhm.
beyond that. So can we start there? I had no idea about these other ones.
I have to tell you, back in the 1970s, I was working with Bob Samples, and we had it all figured out, this learning, our learning styles and the dominance thing. So if you were right-handed, you were absolutely left brain. Well, in the 1980s, when I was working with special ed in intermediate school, and then also at the elementary schools. I got involved with that for 4 years, uh, doing work there and learning the brain gym work. Um, One of the things that happened is um, I was told that George Goodhart used muscle checking to get dominance. And I thought, that's interesting. So I had these um, laboratories, my elementary school and the intermediate school. And what I started doing was checking their dominance by muscle checking. Muscle checking's been around for over 100 years and
Mhm.
used by chiropractors and used by medical doctors. And um, it's very accurate. And what I found was in these special ed classes, is that over 90% of these children were right brain dominant. And I thought
Wow.
that's really interesting. And the right hemisphere has to do, of course, with a global perspective. It's very kinesthetic. It's also very emotional. Um, it's intuitive. It's the side of the brain that gives that. Now, we all have that.
Hmm.
And so that's an important part of our living. But as I started going through this, one of the things that I found is that this 90% of these children that were right brain dominant were also right-handed, right-eyed, right ear, and right foot. And it was like, wow. And that I have that profile. It's all right, we call it. So here's an interesting thing. When you look at, I'm going to just get a picture up here. I made a little drawing of one of the dominances. And what we know is that, okay, so let me give you, this is the right hemisphere, this is the left hemisphere. Let me just put, this is right, this is left, okay, right and left. And the nerve endings, the nerves from the right hemisphere cross in the medulla oblongata down in the spinal cord and go to the other side of the body. So the left eye feeds directly into the right hemisphere. The left ear feeds directly into the right hemisphere. The left hand and the left foot. Okay. So what we found is that when people are under stress, the non-dominant hemisphere, like I was talking here about the right hemisphere, the non-dominant, the left hemisphere shuts down by 75 to 85%.
Wow.
It's not needed. And the right hemisphere is the only thing that's available. So if you're right-handed, right-footed, right eye, and right ear, what's going to happen if you're under stress? You're not going to be able to see. You're not going to be able to hear. You won't be able to move, and you won't be able to communicate well. Okay. So
Wow.
here were all of these children that are blocked, and so when they get under stress, what do we see? They're kinesthetic, they got to move. They're emotional. They've, if they do talk, talking is difficult when you're under stress, if you're right brain dominant. Instead, what they would do is get very emotional and shout and yell and do things that we say are not appropriate in a learning situation. And then we start calling them hyperactive because they needed to move. They can't see. And we're trying to tell them something and they won't get it. They won't understand what we're talking about or see what we're trying to show them. Then they have problems with reading. So we end up sending them to special ed. Now, like I say, I had that profile and I was lucky because when I was in school, I was born in 1944. So in the 40s and the early 50s, they didn't have special ed. And so, and I didn't have to start reading until about the age of 7. And I didn't read, actually. I didn't figure this out till I was 10. And I'm an avid reader. And we're finding that reading is not that important. But integrating the brain to see the whole picture, to understand the global perspective is important. Okay.
Wow.
And just developmentally, we know that the right hemisphere is the first to come on. And up until about the age of 7, the right hemisphere is dominant. So what we should be is in nature. Like you say, 1,000 hours outside, we've got to be in nature and learning from nature and learning from the whole world and each other. Children need to be together and teaching each other things. And then about the age of 7 or 8, the left hemisphere kind of comes on. And that's when we can now do things that are familiar, that are data oriented, that are detail oriented. That's a great time to start learning to read music, to to get the concepts of mathematics. And of course, if you've been in nature, you're going to get those concepts in a global way, all the Archimedean twists, the golden mean understanding in math. So what we want is for both hemispheres to be active and being used. So um, in the dominance factor work, what we can do is we find out the dominance of children and of adults. So here's an interesting thing for me is our dominance patterns also have to do with our preferences. Okay. So
Hmm.
what we really prefer. And so my husband is left brain dominant. And when he's under stress, he wants to know the details, you know, and he
Wow.
can talk. So it's like, let's talk about the details.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm all right. And I can't talk about the details at that time.
Wow.
So it's an interesting thing. The same thing is true. I get children coming in that are blocked on their ear. We say blocked on their ear, so they're not hearing. And the parent is very auditorily, that's their preference. And so they say, that kid never listens to me.
Hmm.
And my husband is also blocked on his ear. He's left ear dominant. So if I tell him something, he doesn't get it if he's under stress. And
Wow.
so
The
we make
implications.
judgments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
Yeah.
implications are so huge with our relationships. We have, after reading your book, we have one daughter who is lovely. She's just a great kid. She's fun to be around. But when she's under a little bit of stress, it's like you're talking to a wall. And in fact, yesterday we were
Yeah.
in the airport. So there's a little bit of stress in the airport. And she had a little toy in her hand. It was in her pocket. And we're trying to push our
Mhm.
bags through, and it's chaotic. And she has this toy in her pocket, and they had said you have to empty all your pockets. Well, she didn't. And then they said, okay, well, you can hold it, but don't put it back in your pocket. And she slid it right back in her pocket. But she's that type of kid that in these stressful situations, it's not getting to her. But normally she's totally fine. You can have a conversation. And so this book really helped me understand her. She's not a bad kid. She's just in this stressful
No,
situation and it's dealing with her brain.
right. We're
Hmm.
all different,
Right.
that's what we have to realize. And unfortunately, our curriculum in the education system right now is really based toward the logic hemisphere, the left hemisphere, and those details. And ever younger. I mean, right now,
Right.
the schools are asking children to read at the age of 4.
Right.
The eyes aren't developed enough to do that, for one thing, but also it's not appropriate.
Mm.
They need to be experiencing the world in a global context.
Right. Until 7 or 8, which is sometimes the third grade,
Yeah.
that shift happens. And so you have so many implications in here, like about your relationships within your home and the school environment. So can we go through the dominances then? So there's left and right brain, but
Mhm.
there's also I. And so all of our kids now know about this. We did the thumb out thing, the test that you talk about in your book to figure out our I dominance and
Uh-huh.
your ear dominance, which you talked about in the book. Which ear would you turn? Really interesting things. I mean, so many interesting things about how you would turn your ear, like if you're sleeping in a new place, that you would have your dominant ear up for
Mhm.
danger. But if you're sleeping at home and you went to really rest, your dominant ear is down. So many interesting.
Right.
So eye, ear, hand, foot. Brain, eye, ear,
Right.
hand, foot. And so now my kids will say, I'm right footed. I'm left. So, whichever sort of foot you lead with, you have all sorts of ideas to figure them out. And so the problems
Mhm.
arise when a dominance, and when I say problems, it's not a problem per se, but it's where you start to see, like where I understood why I can't read when I'm stressed out, is when your dominances line up, are on the same side as your dominant brain. That's
Right.
where we start to see some
That's right.
different things arise. And so in my case, I am left brained and
Mhm.
left eye dominant, so
Uh,
that when I'm stressed out, I can't read. So can we start there? We talk about what happens when we're
sure.
stressed out and you talk about how the dominant side takes over, and then we're scanning for danger and that type of things. Because I think a lot of kids are stressed out in a school environment or during homework and things like that, and there's so much reading involved. So and oh wait, what about the way that you read left to right? You talked about that in certain languages you read right to left, and talking about kids that are recommended for remedial reading. There's so much here. I don't even know where to begin.
Well, let's begin by showing people how they can find a dominance
Mhm.
easily. And I have to say that children, you can find their dominance very easily
Mhm.
because they haven't learned to compensate. But adults, you really need to use the muscle checking. And the muscle checking is explained in the book. And also, if you go to Carla Hannaford and YouTube, I have a YouTube
Mhm.
tutorial on muscle checking to get the dominance. But so you said you were figuring out, your eye dominance, and you can do this. You can just take a piece of paper, roll it up, or yeah, this is a good way to do it actually, and hand it to the person in their midline. Okay, and if they go, and they'll go to one eye. Okay,
Mhm.
just naturally. And
Right.
then that will be the dominant eye. And like you said, your eye was left eye.
Mhm.
Okay. And then the ear, this is really interesting. Our hearing is fully developed at birth. It's the most important sense we have. Actually, it's the last to go at death. So
Wow.
if you have a child just lie down on the floor, face down, just lie down, they'll lie down in what we call fencer's pose. Okay.
Mhm.
And they will turn their dominant ear up
Wow.
naturally because babies do that when they're born. That's so important, that hearing, because if they hear something that is frightening, they'll do what we call a Moro reflex and cry and bring help. So
Yeah.
you can do it that way, or you can again take this or a shell of some type and say, "You want to hear this?" Hand it to them in their midline, and they will go to their dominant ear.
Wow.
Or that's another way. You can also say somebody's talking about you on the other side of that wall, and you want to hear what they're saying. Go listen to the wall. And they will again put their dominant ear up. So what happens for you? You know, with your dominant ear, what is that?
So I am profile C, and what you have in the book, which is so intriguing, is that there are all of these different combinations. There's 32, correct? Brain,
Right.
eye, ear, hand, foot. So I am profile C, which is left brain, left eye, and then everything else is right. Right
And
hand, right
everything else
ear,
is
right
right.
foot. And so
Okay.
that
I
shows up
like
with
that.
the reading. Profile C. Mine is on page 64.
So, okay. So left ear or right ear, right ear.
hmm
Okay. Now, the hand is interesting. When we look at positron emission tomography scans of speaking, what you find is that the dominant part of the brain that is most dominant when we speak has to do with the hand. And it's the
Hmm.
large area of the brain. It has to do with the hand and then also the foot. So um, our hand and it's the last organ, by the way, to fully develop at about the age of 20. Okay,
Wow.
where all of the pieces of our hand are fully developed, and then you get really good pianists or violinists, when you can really use your hand. But
Right.
it's also for speaking and
hmm
gesturing. Children gesture early on. So, um, what you can do again is hand something to the person. Again, you can use this. Or one of the things that I do is I take and make a ball of
Mm-hmm.
paper, and I have the person stand with both of their arms down at their side, and then I throw them this ball of paper, and
Mm-hmm.
which hand comes up and grabs it.
Right.
Okay. It's a very easy way to see what is the dominant hand.
Yeah.
Okay. So yours is right, you say. Okay. And then the foot, I'll do this. So one of the very best ways to do it, okay, is to just have the person lean forward. And what
Oh,
foot catch?
wow.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Or you can have them stand and you can just gently push them.
Mm-hmm.
What foot goes forward to catch them? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a good way of finding their dominance profiles. And here is yours, Jimmy, of course. That's
I
six.
love the picture.
Now, let me
Mm-hmm.
let me give you one of the things that we don't have is the hemisphere. And
Right.
that's harder in adults, especially with children. It's what you can find is if they need to talk a lot, and especially when they're under stress, if they've got to talk,
Wow.
they're left-brained. There's an area there, Wernicke and Broca's area has to do with verbal language.
Mm-hmm.
And we know this too from people that have had strokes. If their stroke is on the left side of the brain, they can't talk. And so
Mm-hmm.
you work, to get them back to being able to talk. The right hemisphere is when you're under stress, you can't talk, or if you do, it's not linear, it's
Mm.
circular and it's emotional. And
Right.
it's like bringing in everything. There's not
Mm-hmm.
that linearity.
Right.
Whereas if you're left brain dominant, you're nice and detail oriented and able to really explain what needs
Mm-hmm.
to be explained.
Right.
Okay. So one of the things you can do with adults is ask somebody that is close to them, do they need to talk?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that
Right.
something that they're doing? Or are they emotional? Now, the thing is, because I'm working a lot with this with adults, and as
Mm-hmm.
women, what we know is that there are more connections across the corpus callosum between the two hemispheres than men have. And
Hmm.
so we, when we're under stress, even if we're left brain dominant, we also bring in that emotionality.
Hmm.
And that's just a female thing. It's a wonderful thing that we have. Um, that we've been taught, I think, that it's not okay, which is
Hmm.
too bad.
Right.
Um, so it's a little harder. That's why the muscle check becomes very valuable
Mm-hmm.
in doing this. Okay.
Can we talk about those
So,
connections? Can we talk about those connections across? Because I think that the there's so much in your book about, well, how to build those connections. And it makes you
mhm,
think about how a lot of what we do does not build those connections. So basically, there's this premise in the book that when we're under stress, and then also you write when we're learning new things, which I thought was super interesting because childhood is filled with learning new things, but also adulthood has become a place where we're having to really learn new things often because our world is rapidly changing in a different way. And, they say that people used to have a job that lasted their whole lifetime. Well, now a student may graduate college and have six jobs in their first decade of life. And so we're in this situation
yeah.
in these times where all the way through adulthood, I think we're having to learn new skills. And so both when we're stressed and when we're learning new things, which was so interesting that came up time and again in the book, that this is what happens when that dominant side will take over. And that
Mhm.
ideally we would have, well, first of all, ways to de-stress, which are in the book. But a lot of times we can't get away from the
Mhm.
new things that we're learning. And so what you're talking about is that we're trying to become more cross-lateral. That's a goal,
Right.
is to help both kids and adults become more cross-lateral, and that moving your body, playing an instrument,
Yeah.
getting outside, free play. Can you talk about how can we become more cross-lateral so that we can help our children and help ourselves?
Right. We need to do that.
Mhm.
So what you're saying, okay. So since you are left brain dominant, I'm just going to do this. I'll show that cross lateral. Okay. All right. So the nerve fibers from the left hemisphere cross over in the medulla oblongata to the right side.
Mhm.
So when you're under stress, let's say under stress, and then I'll show you how to integrate a little better. But you're going to hear.
Mhm.
But what you're going to listen for, because the left hemisphere has to do with details, you want to hear the details. If
Mhm.
someone starts to give you a story, a big story, it's like, cut to the chase, give me the details.
Yeah.
You know, you really need to do that because your preference is going to be to that left hemisphere. You
Mhm.
want the details. And you're going to be able to talk the details. The
Right.
hand has to do with communication. And you're actually going to be able to follow details like in a dance step
Mhm.
or, something like that. You're able to do that.
Right.
Okay. But you're not going to see.
Right.
Okay. So, what we want to do is get this hemisphere, the right hemisphere, on so that you can see.
Yes.
All right. And you just won't be able to see. But when we get the right hemisphere on, and I'll show you some ways to do that, what's very cool is that your preference will be seeing the big picture.
Hmm.
So you have this great thing where you can see the big picture and you can put it into a linear context to explain it to others.
Wow.
So this is
Yeah,
why
this
you're
is
doing
all
that.
neat. It's so neat. All the different
Yeah.
things, all the different combinations. Parents need
Uh-huh.
to understand themselves and also their students. And you go through all of these different things, like even placement in the classroom. If you're left eye
Mhm.
dominated, you should sit on a certain side. And if you're right eye dominated, and if you're auditory, this is where you should sit. And you talked about even with driving that for people who scan different ways, it's going to affect their driving. And there is so much here that helps us to understand ourselves and helps us to understand others, and really
So
can enhance our lives.
let me show you this thing with your eye, which is quite interesting. And again, a lot of the children that have problems with reading,
Hmm.
okay, and that early on too, are left eye dominant. So
Right.
I'm gonna do this.
And
I'm
that's
making it.
because we read from left to right.
That's right.
Okay.
But we normally would read from left to right. But left eye dominant folks read from right to left.
Wow.
That's the preference.
Hmm.
Okay, so I'm gonna just a second here. We'll get this picture. Okay, what we know. So this is the right, this is the left. Okay, so what happens is if we are right eye dominant, okay, right eye dominant, what we tend to do is we go from left to right. We will
Mhm.
actually read from left to right. And I'm right eye dominant. I always like to sit on the right side of a lecture hall or, a movie scene because I'm going to look across this way. I'm going to see it better.
Wow.
If instead you are left eye dominant, what you will naturally do is go from right to left, which makes you
Wow.
good at Chinese and Hebrew and Arabic, but
Mhm.
not necessarily English.
Mhm.
So, and this is also, I see these children that are left eye dominant, um, they can do mirror writing. And
Wow.
you probably do mirror writing also. But also, here's another thing that you like to do. If you get a book, a magazine, what you will do is start at the back.
Hmm.
You know, you'll open
Interesting.
your book from the back and kind of go this
Wow.
way.
That is what I do.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. And
So, yeah, parents need to know this, don't they? And teachers.
yeah, yeah. And
Mhm.
so putting a child in a certain place in the classroom is quite important.
Mhm.
Um, so the other thing is, I'm going to have you do this right now, Jenny.
Mhm.
Take a book
Okay.
and turn it upside down. Okay. And
Okay.
I want you to just read the first line, and you're going to read from right to left.
A visual auditory learner that must be able to see and hear the whole picture. Profile
Any
I.
problems?
No?
Very simple for people that are left eye dominant to read upside down. And
Whoa.
sometimes when children are really struggling and they're left eye dominant, you know, turning the book upside down gives them a little head start. It's like, oh, I can read like this, you know. And then,
Wow.
uh,
That is incredible. There is so much to learn about this. It's
yeah.
fascinating. And so if we're
Now,
go ahead.
now the other thing is, what would be nice is to get both your eyes on, and then
Right.
you've got both hemispheres going. So we can do eye exercises that help to do that.
Mhm.
Okay. So should I show you some? Would that be good?
Sure, and you have some that are in the book too. I just think this is one of those reference books that you come back to. I've actually come back to it time and again because there's always something new to find and to learn and discover. And so people know that this dominance, it's called the dominance factor. You have exercises in the back and ideas throughout the
Mhm.
book about connecting the brain. Like you would talk about, this is an interesting story to me. You would say, you're going up to speak at an event and you feel stress. So I relate to that because I speak at events and I feel really stressed. But then
Mhm.
so then you know that part of your brain might be shutting down 75 to 80%. So you have all of these strategies of number one, de stressing, but number two, like the eye exercises, but also the figure eights and full body exercises that help us to strengthen the other side so that we can function more optimally. So yeah, sure. I'd
Right.
love to hear either an eye
Please use
example.
both hemispheres.
Mhm.
Mhm. So what's interesting too is when we muscle check, like I would muscle check for me, I would just touch my eye and muscle check, and this would be on. And when I touch this, this would be off. And then I would touch my hemisphere. And so the right hemisphere would be on, the left hemisphere would be off. Okay, so this is my dominant hemisphere. Now, if I do these activities, and here's a wonderful one. Actually, there's a lot of them, but
Yes.
this is a actually, this is a wonderful one. Let's do this one. So start here and just massage and then go under your eyebrows.
So we're just massaging like on the bridge of our nose, kind of under the eyebrows.
Under the
It's real
eyebrows and
easy.
down.
Yep.
Okay. Then you're going to go right on the bone under your eye,
We're just doing little circles and massaging basically around the eye,
circles, massaging.
back
This
to the
feels
bridge of
so
the
good.
nose. It does feel really
Especially
good.
if you're tired when you've been focusing on your computer or your
Hmm.
iPad or your cell phone too long.
Right.
This is really good to help the eyes relax and coming down all the way down. And when you get here, I want you to open your mouth. This
Hmm.
is the temporomandibular joint. More
Hmm.
nerves go across this joint than any other joint in your body, and they go to your eyes. So they help you to
Wow.
see. So yawn. And just massage that area. And then go
Wow.
under your cheekbones
It does feel
like
really good.
that.
We're basically just giving
It
ourselves a
does.
full face massage here.
Yeah. And then I just go, okay.
Wow.
Now, if I were to check you, muscle check you, both eyes would be on and
Hmm.
both hemispheres.
And that just
Something
took
like
and that
that.
just took 60 seconds. So I remember you
Hmm.
talking about different examples in your book, like with your piano lessons and driving. Like you said, in Russia, they have this tradition. I don't know if that's what you would call it, but before they drive, they have this a couple minutes of slowdown, or so it's about taking that
Hmm.
time, and it's just a small amount of time when you're heading into a situation,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of them that increase stress, or you're learning
Yeah.
something new, that you can make it so
Hmm.
that you'll be a lot more successful and in an optimal space. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Knitting and walking
Uh-huh.
were topics in here. Can you talk about knitting and walking and how that helps,
Sure.
both of them help to stimulate the brain?
Again, because there's such a huge area for the hands, using the hands like knitting or
Hmm.
crocheting, something where you're using the hands. In Denmark, the children all knit
Wow.
because it helps both hemispheres. You activate both hemispheres. And of course, walking. Whenever we walk, we're doing cross-lateral, especially if the arms are swing, if you're really, you're walking cross-laterally. The
Hmm.
arms, you're activating both hemispheres in the brain. It's very profound. Also, one of our greatest activities that really integrates everything quickly is the hookups. And that one is you cross one ankle over the other, whichever
Hmm.
feels right. And then with the back of the hands together, thumbs down, with one hand over the other, interlock it, roll them under, get your ears away from your shoulders, put your
Yeah.
tongue on the roof of your mouth,
Hmm.
and just breathe and get really present in this moment. I
Hmm.
like to have people just look around the room and just be really aware of everything they see. Like I'm looking at pictures of my daughter and of my great
Mm.
grandparents, and I'm going, wow.
Aw. Yeah.
And then rubbing the hands together afterwards, activating the hands on the both sides.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it doesn't
One of
take
the
much.
doesn't take much at all.
And you have
Yeah.
ideas, you have the brain gym ideas also in Smart Moves. So both books together give a lot of information for parents to use and for teachers
Mhm.
to go to. I could imagine that counselors would use this, or if kids come in and they're in an argument, that this is a great way to start. You had even talked in the book that we could walk when we're having a little more heated discussions, that walking would
Right.
help us because it's helping to activate both sides of the brain. And people are talking about that now. Like you even had a sentence in here. It was so good. You said science is proving that we must move to learn. And so it's all starting to come out. It's tumbling out. People are having their office meetings while they take a walk. Well, there's
Mm-hmm.
science then to back that up.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about waking up the brain as well, like with the vestibular sense. So
Mm-hmm.
can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And just the research in 1999, Gerd Kepperman and Fred Gage discovered that we're growing new nerve cells till the day we die. And
Wow.
Henrietta von Prague at Marion Diamond's laboratory in finding out, because they had found that 20 years earlier, rodents were growing new nerve cells in the hippocampus, which has to do with memory, and the olfactory lobe. And actually, the Japanese researchers found new nerves growing in the spine. She wanted
Wow.
to know how, what was it that got that to happen? And what she discovered, it was running wheels. It was that cross-lateral integrated movement. So we
Wow.
need to be moving. We've got to be moving. Um, and so now, you know, we're looking at, we cannot learn sitting still and being quiet. That is not the way we learn. And so as adults, as children, all of us, we need to be moving.
Hmm. Yes, and I
And
love how you say, well, this is what's making those neural pathways. You're stimulating them, you're making these
mhm.
pathways, and then that translates into being more efficient in everything.
Everything. And when we move too, we know the research is showing we grow more mitochondria. Mitochondria have to do with energy within the body. And it's the Krebs cycle, it's the breaking down of our food to give us energy. And I just see so many people, couch potatoes that are tired because they have not been moving enough. And
Wow, that is counterintuitive. They're tired because they have not been moving.
right,
So,
exactly.
so explain that just a little bit. Uh, explain that one more time. They're tired because they've not been moving.
Right. Because if you're moving, you're growing more mitochondria, or you're activating your mitochondria, which give you the energy. It breaks down food into what we call ATP and
Wow.
phosphate, which gives us the energy for our bodies. And we just
Wow. That's huge. And I think that explains why, like, for me, that I have days maybe where I sit and I do podcasts, and that
uh-huh,
sitting tends to lead to more sitting, that you don't feel this energy, like, I'm going to get up and go do something. And that's very important for people to know who have sedentary jobs, that we have to be
right,
intentional then about getting up and moving, because you would think, now I've sat all day, so now my body wants to get up and move, but actually it's the opposite. Sitting
right.
leads to more sitting, and movement leads to more movement.
Mm-hmm, right.
Wow. The
Good.
the percentages in this book are so glaring. And when you talk about remedial students have a higher percentage of left eye dominance. It's 81%. And so there is a lot in here for parents to go through and to read, especially if they have students that are maybe
Mhm.
struggling with schoolwork. And you have so much in here about the brain and how it works, and visually able learners and auditory able learners. It's like, I think every parent needs to know all of these different things. Can you talk about how playing a musical instrument, because you always hear about musical instrument and how music helps with brain development, but you don't necessarily hear why. And in this book, you explain why, especially like the violin or certain ones like that. So I think people would be interested to know
Well,
what's the
one thing
science
we
behind
know
it.
is from studies, PET scans, and EEG studies, is that when we play an instrument, it activates the whole brain,
Yeah.
everything. Okay. But here's an interesting thing, things like the violin, or flutophones, anything that has a fipple, woodwinds that sits against the teeth, and the violin is right against the bone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's vibrating the head. It's activating,
Wow.
it's vibrating the whole head and waking the whole system up.
Wow.
And so we see that the students that play instruments do much better too in school and in their
Mm-hmm.
work. The other thing is it's tying in again to the hearing. And one of the things that we know, the term dyslexia, what we found out really has to do with sound discrimination. So it's first of all an auditory problem, where the child is not hearing the sound. And if they can't hear the sound, they cannot replicate it,
Mm-hmm.
to speak it. And then for them to read it, they can't pick up the reading. It doesn't make any sense to them. They're
Right.
not hearing the phonics, the phonetics of it. And so getting the hearing going is really, really important. And so singing
Mm-hmm.
works for that too. When you're singing, you're vibrating. If you feel here, you're getting all of these vocal cords vibrating the whole head
Mm-hmm.
region, the whole bone structure. So
Wow.
singing or playing a musical instrument really helps. And it's tied into the vestibular system,
Mm-hmm.
which is the vestibule, the entryway into the brain. Again, it's the ears, the semicircular canals of the inner ear and the cochlea, but it has to do with balance. And one of the things that we see is that these children that are really struggling don't have balance, and they're not being able to do that. So what we did with uh, the hookups demands a lot of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with cross crawling. But if you can cross crawl, taking a walk is great. But if you can get the children to cross their midline, and
Mm-hmm.
again, these children have a hard time crossing the midline like this, so that they're really getting an activation of both hemispheres. This is very profound in
Mm-hmm.
activating the whole brain. The other thing that I would add to this is to help the ears, because again, a lot of times I'm going to show you this is the profile of most of the special ed kids, over 90% of them.
I mean, that is such a huge statistic. It just goes to show that their environment needs to support their type of learning.
Right.
90%. They're
The,
it's just a certain type of learner.
right.
Yeah. And this is
They're,
yours, correct? This is your dominance
it's my,
profile
yes, it is.
is all
And so
right.
when I'm under stress, I cannot talk. And so, and I can't see, I can't hear, I can't move. And if there was a fire, I was thinking of this. If there was a fire, I would be so glad to have you in my life. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're integrated, you're going to see what's happening and you're going to instruct people on specifically, you go here, you go there. This is going to, it would be
Wow.
helpful to have you in my life. But this is my profile, and most of these children are, again, blocked on their ear. So, one of the very simple and very profound things you can do is unroll the earlobes. So, you
Mm-hmm.
start at the top of the ear lobe. I don't know if you can see
Mm-hmm.
this. Let's see. And you go all the way down to the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
and you do that 3 times. And
And
again,
what you're
just
doing is just massaging out just a couple times on both ears and kind of
yep,
wiggling at the bottom. Mm-hmm.
activating. You're activating. Now, if I were to check your right and left hemisphere and your right and left ear, they'd all be on.
Wow.
This is a simple thing to do. And researchers have studied this. They know the yellow emperor said there were 144 points in the ear. And
Mm-hmm.
in Chinese medicine, and they use those points, with acupuncture or acupressure to activate,
Mhm.
all these parts of the
Wow.
body. And now the researchers, and there's 60 journals coming in monthly to the National Medical Library in Washington, D.C., just on studies on traditional Chinese medicine.
Mhm.
And what they've discovered is that there are thousands of points in the ear that when I activate this by just touching it,
Mhm.
there's all sorts of activation in my feet.
Wow.
So it's like waking up the whole body to
Mhm.
listen,
Right.
and brain. So
Wow.
we have tools to really assist ourselves and our children,
Mhm.
when they're having troubles. So let me just show you this too. When I'm not under stress, when I've got both hemispheres on,
Mhm.
okay, I can see the details. I can hear the detail. I love the details. You can
Mm.
tell that by my books. I've got
That's
many details
true.
in
Oh, I think I've read this book. I think I've read both of your books that I own probably 5 times each
there.
because
Uh-huh.
they're so rich with detail. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm able to do that if I'm not stressed. I can
Yeah.
pick up those details. I love it. I sit in the front of the lecture hall and I'm taking notes all the
Mhm.
time, right? And then I can
Yeah.
put them into a global perspective to explain them in a story form.
Right.
Okay. And I can
Right.
even follow a dance step, which is
Wow.
amazing.
Yeah. So
My
to
husband,
Mhm.
well, let me get his left foot dominant, and I know you've heard the jokes about left-footed. You know,
Oh,
they're
yes, 2 left feet, that's what people say.
right, 2 left feet. So
Mhm.
when we go dancing, he never he's connected right up here to the right hemisphere. He has to make up his own dance. You know, he can't follow a dance step, and it's
Mhm.
frustrating.
Yeah.
I'm okay. What were you saying? I'm
Well,
sorry.
you have this
Excited.
statement in the book, probably for this audience when we're talking about getting outside and playing. You have the statement in the book that I would is so impactful. Well, I think first of all, parents and teachers need to be aware that there are these 32 dominance profiles, and I would imagine that many are not. I had no idea that there was the eye, ear, and foot. And so to be aware, to know ourselves, to know our children, so that we can support each other and understand ourselves better. But then, really, that for me, what I'm taking away, a big thing like a to do, is to try and be more cross lateral and to notice situations where I'm in stress and to have these tools that are at my disposal. And you write in this book, so we're trying to get kids outside and families outside and parents outside and classrooms outside and remembering that movement is learning, which is a huge thing you talk about in this book and Smart Moves. But you have this sentence, the most important activity we can engage in to increase brain integration is unstructured imaginative play, so crucial for social, emotional, and cognitive development. And then you go on, and this is one of my favorite parts, Carla, because I was surprised. You write, for children, creative play is critical to becoming socially adept, coping with stress, and building cognitive skills such as problem solving. And then you write, for adults, which I love because we always talk about play and unstructured play. We're only thinking about kids. But you write, for adults, creative play is critical for coping with stress and becoming more open and creative. So I know we're running out of time, but there's so much to learn in here and so much to take away, which makes it such a great book because there's things you can actually do. So for parents who are nervous about taking time away from structured activities and taking that time and giving it to unstructured, open-ended play, and they're nervous because all these structured things they think are this is what the colleges are going to look for and all these things. How can we convince? What do we say to the parent that is nervous about having open-ended time in their life?
So Let me just give you a quick example. We have had in Singapore and Hong Kong with very structured uh, school system, which has now changed anyway, but in that structuring, then these students could take tests and they would come to our universities here in the United States, the big universities, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and they would flunk out because they couldn't think outside the box.
Wow.
And that's what we have to do now. The jobs that our children are going to be taking in 10 years haven't been invented yet. And they're
Mm-hmm.
the ones that are going to invent them. And they need that unstructured play.
Yeah.
And they need to be in nature. Just what you're saying is so important because in nature, things are so complex and it gives children a chance to really understand the physical world deeper so that then they can understand mathematics and language and everything else and their connection to the physical world and to each other.
Right.
So,
Right. There's a lot
yeah.
that's happening in play, both for kids and adults, even barefoot. You talk about how barefoot helps
Yeah,
with balance for children and the elderly.
you bet. There are
Hmm.
more nerve endings in the feet and the hands than any other organ. And so we need to
Right.
be barefoot a lot.
Yes. Yes. Well, Carla, this book, it just changed both of your books have really changed our whole family dynamic and our lives, helping us to understand ourselves and each other better and making us more excited to do these types of things that help that cross-lateral connection get stronger and to build that. Like, so for example, I play the piano and I've played since I was really young, and there's a composer named Scarlatti, and a lot of his songs involve crossover. So you're playing and
Uh-huh.
you're crossing over. Some of them, the whole thing is crossover. And I just remember even as a young child playing these pieces and thinking, oh, my brain is so tired at the end of those. Or when I go for a walk barefoot and it's slippery, your brain is so tired at the end of those experiences. You feel it. And so it's
Yes.
exciting to think, oh, if I get out and I walk and I really move my arms, or if we're having a stressful situation in our family, there are these tools at our disposal that are fairly easy to implement, quick, that can really change the whole dynamic. So, Carla, this book, The Dominance Factor, how knowing your dominant eye, ear, brain, hand, and foot can improve your learning is so phenomenal for our world and will continue to be. It's timely. I mean, even isn't that interesting? Sometimes you wrote a book, this book in 1997. 1997. And our world needs it more. I would it continues to need it. All this information for the way that our world is changing. So thank you for being here.
That's been updated. So
Yes, it's a
in
2011
2000,
version, right?
yeah,
That's the one I have, the 2011 version. But
yeah.
information that is always going to be timely and continue to be timely. So, Carla, if people want to find out more about you, can you tell them where to go?
Well, you can go to my website, just go Carla Hannaford, and that will come up. And you can go to my publisher's website, which is greatriverbooks.com. And
carlahannaford.com. Great. And you have two other books. One is easier to get, and the other one, people are going to have to look on eBay, but they're full of detail. Like I said, it's interesting. I love that you ended with that part about yourself, because they are so filled with detail that, like I said, I have gone back to them more so than many books that I have time and again. Like, I could really understand, or there's these new pieces that come out and things to understand. So thank you.
thank you, Jenny. And keep working and get those people out in nature because that's where all the learning is.
Hmm, thank you.
Yeah.
This was awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'll post this real soon, and I'll move on to the next one.
Okay.
Thank you. It was good seeing you.
Thank you, Tiffany. Yeah, take care. Bye bye.